Good evening and welcome to the regular meeting of council for July 20th, 2022, and we're starting at 6:01. I declare the meeting open. Always like to do that. And at this time, I'm looking to confirm the agenda. Are there any emergent items from any of the councillors? Councillor Langmaid?
Your Worship, I would like to amend the agenda to include an additional section in the closed portion of the meeting. That would be section 12.2 for council dialogue, confidential evaluations, for section 19, subsection 2.
Thank you. Anything else from any other councillors? Anything from administration?
No, thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. So at this time, we need a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Councillor Montgomery?
Thank you. I'll move the agenda as amended.
Thank you. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? And it's carried. We have no public hearing tonight. Are there any public comments from people who are here or phoning in? And just keep in mind the comments have to be related to one of the agenda items. Seeing none, we move on to 5. We have no delegations tonight. Now we have the next one is the consent agenda. And what I will ask council is, are you satisfied with the way the consent agenda lists the items that would be brought forward and possibly passed as a group? Or is there an item from the consent agenda that you would like to see pulled? And I would like to see the 8.8 one pulled so that we could possibly discuss it as a separate item. And if it helps, and maybe I could turn to CAO Scoble, is there anything that you might, is this the wrong time to do, like if I had a question and it would just take a question to, or just one quick answer, should I leave that if it's pulled or should I just, I guess what I'm saying is that I might get an answer that would convince me to leave it in there on the consent agenda, but I'm not sure how to proceed.
Well, my experience, I'll defer to Ledge if they have comments as well, but my experience is if it's pulled from the agenda, it just that's it. If that's what council votes, then it just comes up at the regular point in the agenda package. So if it's item, I think it's 8 point, just using an example, 8.3 would come up at 8.3 in the agenda if that was removed.
Yeah, 8.8. But would I would have to give up the chair then to Deputy Mayor so that I could make a motion for that pulling of the item?
That would be my understanding, but I'll defer to Ledge Services here.
Your Worship.
Yes.
Can I just move the consent agenda minus 8.8?
Would that be a clean way to do it then, Chris? Okay, that sounds good. So we have a motion on the floor to keep the consent agenda as presented, except without 8.8 campaign disclosure statements. You've all heard the motion. Any discussion on Councillor Montgomery's motion? Seeing none, all in favor? And that motion is carried. So 8.8 will return to its original spot. And that brings us to confirmation of minutes, item 7.1, regular council meeting minutes for July 6th.
Point of order, Your Worship.
Councillor Langmaid?
That was included in the omnibus motion that we just voted on.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 8 under business. And we're dealing with the quarter 1, 8.1, 2022 quarter 1 financial report. And good evening.
Good evening, Council. It is my pleasure to bring forward the topic of the 2022 Quarter 1 financial update. My name is Brenda Hugo, and I am a subcontractor with the town supporting the finance team. So with that, the agenda for this topic tonight will be background, process, the financial reports, and within the financial reports will be a common themes, the statement of financial position, statement of operations, and then we'll go through individually the operations by department, and then an update on the capital projects. And just before we get in, I would like to thank council for both their patience and their indulgence for the delay in sharing this Q1 report. We know it's a little bit into the summertime, and we would have preferred to have been able to bring it forward a little sooner. With that, some of the background, we have, through council's strategic vision, the message from the CAO that we look forward to providing regular updates to the community, and that we also follow policy 1801, which is the budget policy for citizen engagement, transparency, and accountability. And within that policy, it does have the requirement for quarterly financial updates to include the statement of financial position, the statement of operations, and then the capital projects updates. So the process is to share is that we are bringing forward draft, unaudited information, and that it is the best information that we have at the time. Given that this is a few months past a typical Q1 reporting, we can be fairly confident that they're solid numbers, in part because we would have received all of the potential invoices for Q1, been able to review them and process them. And so that speaks to the quality of the information. When we're looking at doing a quarterly report, where our starting point would be obviously is the quarter end, that particular month end, we would then add a month to allow for those invoices to come in, to be received and reviewed and then processed. And then we would want to gather all that information together and prepare it for council. Looking forward to Q2, we can anticipate that that will be brought forward, first council meeting in September, and then Q3 would be a presentation in November. So some of the common themes. Common themes, I use this as kind of a place to say if I see some type of activity that's occurring in multiple different operations or areas of this town, I want to just put them onto one slide and present them there. And then we don't have to hear me repeating that same explanation through multiple different departments. So so if I use an example, grants, so any annual allocations that we would have received grants, we would be reporting 100% of that revenue right now, even though possibly the budget's only one quarter in, so 25% of the way in. So you're going to see a very strong positive variance. You'd expect that variance to shrink as we go through the year. So that's a timing issue. So you'll see that throughout some of the various areas, and it'll say, for example, common themes. So that's where the explanation would be found. For investment income, when we receive the income, it's based on the type of investment we go into, their interest earning. They'll either be paying the interest annually or semi-annually, and it'll be based on the time that we went into that investment. So it's sporadic throughout the year, so the investment income is not a regular monthly amount, it just varies, but you'll see that our variances will correct as we go through the year. Seasonality, your typical seasonality would be we've got a lot more spending that occurs more in that June, July, August, so second and third quarter. So we'll have a lot of positive variances early on in the year, but we would expect it to reduce as we go through. So I just provided a few examples there. And just for clarity, Q1 only represents obviously the first 25% of the budget. So we just take the budget, divide it by 4, and that's what our budget, so that's our line to compare against. And another example of common themes is the salary, wages, and benefits. I like to bring all of this one together onto one so that it's nice and clean to see. For seasonality, we would expect parks and aquatics, that there would be more spending over the summer months, so we'll see that positive variance reduce down. For some of the other areas within the city, there's vacancies where departures have occurred. And for some of those vacancies, there's also active recruitment, so there's a gap in time, and we'll see some of those variances potentially reduce. And then from a budget perspective, we know going into our 2023 that there will be some improved budget processes, specifically when we're looking at salary, wages, and benefits. And then I also provide a quick little, very simple, general rule of thumb on variances. So positive variance means more money in the bank account. That's usually my first idea when I'm thinking about variances, is what happens to the money. It's typically because we either have more revenue or we spent less. And then the opposite for negative variances. In this report, a positive variance will be shown in black and a negative variance will be shown in red. And that's a generality. It holds true for most, but maybe not all cases. So the financial reports, this one is the statement of financial position. And so essentially the balance sheet, if you will. One of the things that I also did is color-coded. So any of the explanations that are on the right-hand side, if they're in blue, they refer to the top part of the report. So for this one, it'd be assets. For later reports, it would be revenue. And then black would refer to the middle or bottom part. So liabilities for this report and expenses for later. So in looking at the variances, the first one that I kind of pulled out when I really want to look into what's happening with the taxes and grants in place is because that's a very large positive variance of 2.4 million. And that is a receivable account, and that's really to do with taxes being due in June 30th. So we should see that self-correct in Q2. And then the other one was the investments, and we can see when we compare from December 31st to March 31 that there was a $2 million negative variance, which represents that a withdrawal occurred on the investments. And so this happened at a time prior to me joining, so I had to do a little bit of digging into figuring out what was going on with this withdrawal. And so just before I get to that, I would like to explain what might the investments represent. And so where the cash for the investments comes from, it's three different areas. One would be any grant dollars that we receive in advance of spending the grant. So that's one. The other would be off-site levies, where we receive cash before we do the capital spend on that particular project from development. And then the third would be your accumulated surplus. So those are the three buckets, and usually you would take that cash, you'd put it in investments, and you'd earn a few extra dollars, and then that investment income would get prorated back over those various buckets for use. So with that explanation, when I was able to drill in and look at the historical, it would seem that this withdrawal was a withdrawal planned for cash flow purposes. So hindsight, being 2020, looking back at it, it would appear that we may not have needed to do that. There was no big capital spend that we needed to pay for in that first quarter, or even in the subsequent April, May, and latter months. The process and following the cash and investment policy, that the authority to be able to do that withdrawal, that authority and that process was followed. So one of the intentions that we have is when we get through to Q2, we'll do a fairly complex cash flow projection, and if by chance we still don't need that money in the bank account for our future obligations for the year, then we will look to possibly putting it back into investments or a portion thereof. But that's the intent at this point, because it does not seem that we actually needed to make that withdrawal. But I say that in hindsight, which is very easy. And then one of the steps that we will do in considering if there is that opportunity is to ensure that those three buckets, that restricted surplus account, the offsite levies for the restricted surplus, the grant dollars, and the accumulated surplus are always covered off by the investment balance. At this point in time, it still is. It's just a smaller margin. On the liability side, for accounts payable and accrued liabilities, so what we see here is that our balance from December to March, it went down. It went down by roughly $1 million. This is a typical pattern that we would anticipate to see our accounts payable being paid down because quarter 3, quarter 4 from the prior year being higher spending quarters. And it's just kind of playing catch up with all of those invoices. Under the deposits, here again, the balance that we owed out on deposits was reduced, and that was because we were refunding some of the developer security. And then long-term debt. So this represents how much principal was paid back during quarter 1. And long-term debt, very similar to investments in that the principal payments will either be annual or semi-annual, and it's really just driven off of when the date that the debt was taken on, so it's sporadic throughout the year. The next is the statement of operations. So with the statement of operations, one of the things I would like to share is that this is a new format. Anything that's in the far right-hand side in the green represents a comparison of quarter 1 of 2022, back to quarter 1 of 2021. So it's the same time frame comparing to last year. And then anything in the yellow represents what has happened within the first quarter of this year and comparison back against budget. So this particular format follows the audited financials where we are looking at the type of activities, so whether it's taxes or license and permits on the revenue side or expenses like salaries and bank charges or whatever on the expense side. This is the big picture view. As we go through later into the presentation, we will get into more granular information. Overall, for the first quarter, the town has a excess of revenue.
Sorry, Brenda, can I just interrupt
Yeah.
you for a moment? Councillor Montgomery?
Thank you. I'd like to move that we go in camera. I just would like to find out more information about what we were discussing a couple of minutes ago, if you don't mind. I don't know what FOIP section that would be, but it'd be under financial stuff, I guess.
Or advice from officials.
And sorry, what specifically are you?
I think he's looking at that, the move of the investment money.
Okay, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to go in camera to discuss that one item from the quarter 1 financial update. Any discussion? All in favor? Deputy Mayor Peterson, can you say aye or nay? Deputy Mayor? Peterson? Deputy Mayor, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, so are you in favor of that motion to go in camera for that?
No.
one? No? Okay, so we have, oh, Debbie's not in favor, Councillor Mitzner is not in favor. So we had 5 to 2 in favor. Okay, so we're going in camera. And will you guys just let me know when we're not broadcasting?